So glad that you're all here with us on this Sunday. And in just a moment, we're going to continue our series through the book of James called Faith Works. But as you can tell by some of our staff and some of the other folks around here, we're coming up on Serve South Ogden. And Pastor Jimmy is here to give us one last update before we get going.
It's a week away, and it's not too late to sign up. You can sign up through those double doors. There's a table out there, or you can sign up in the bulletin or online. Currently, we have about 410 people. We have 40 Job Corps students who are going to come serve with us all week, too. That's just awesome. They're going to join us. We'll put them to work. And so, but you guys can sign up for a day or all week. We have 17 homes. We're doing mass projects on trees coming down, yards, fences, roofs. I mean, there's something for everyone. This is a big party. And the whole community, we're all on 3 streets. And so I go through this community like every day, and I'm driving my God's Garage car around, and they're all like, who's this guy, I get out of the car this week to go check out a couple more homes as possible projects, and some guy jumps out of his car because he's just pulling in. He's like, hey, are you that God guy? I'm like, no, I'm the guy, but I'm not the God guy. That would be Jesus, And so, but he goes, I heard you guys are doing projects, so there's a buzz on these 3 streets to what we're doing, and they can't wait for us to come. So we're all on 3 streets. There's like 9 homes on one street. If you took a drone and went straight up, you'd see everyone working at the same time. And so you don't want to miss the opportunity. You can serve like one day, all week. We're going to feed everyone. All the T-shirts are free if you sign up. Someone donated 700 T-shirts, and that's a lot of money. I couldn't believe they did that. And so pick up a T-shirt so we can all wash it every day. If you come back, no, you're not getting a second one. Just wash it again. Okay, it's good to wash your clothes once in a while, right? And what's today? Father's Day, right? So sign all the husbands and fathers and everyone up, okay? Sign them all up today as a present. They'll love you, okay, all week, okay?
Sure, Jimmy. Make them leave. That's really awesome.
Well, thanks so much. See you in the hood, okay?
All right. If you've been waiting, to sign up, now is the time, and it is a blast to be a part of that special week. And as Jimmy mentioned, it doesn't have to be all week. It can be whenever it works for you on one day or however many you're able to make it. So let's turn our attention in the direction of our message for today. We're making our way through a New Testament book called James, and James is someone who pulls no punches. Let's just put it in these terms, he's just blunt. And today we're going to see him be blunt with an issue that I think the temptation for us would be to say, yeah, you know what? I know somebody who could really benefit from hearing what James is talking about, and I'm going to ask us to put that sort of mindset aside and for us to take a look inside of ourselves. And if you're like me, when we begin to take a look at the issue today, I think it's going to be real easy for us to say, yeah, that doesn't have anything to do with me. I know that happens in this world, but not me. But let's follow James all the way through this, because what he is going to do is unpack this in ways that I think help us to see that there might be more of this reality inside of me than I would like to acknowledge. So with that in mind, let me ask you a blunt question as we get started here. What kind of snob are you? Right, I think in some ways we're all a little bit snobs in some areas, and we're probably okay with owning that. And I've come up with a few ideas of ways in which we might be snobs. Are you a coffee snob? You only go certain places and you wouldn't touch other stuff. I know just this morning when I came in, the brewers were being a little bit slow, and I went in there and I said, hey, I went over to the thing and said, oh yeah, that one's not full yet, but you can get some of this regular stuff. But the one that was not working, I said, please, Highlander grog only for this guy. I'm not going to drink that regular stuff. Why do we even brew that? And maybe you have, a coffee snob or food snob, certain things that you would eat or not eat. Book snobs, you wouldn't touch a Kindle if your life, depended on it. You want to hold that book and smell those pages. Are you a yard snob? Some people freely owning that. Where you look at your yard and then you look at somebody else's yard and you think, little bit more effort there, and Come a long way. Are you a music snob? You only listen to certain things and you just dismiss other things as a bunch of junk and noise? Certain cars that you would drive and you wouldn't be caught dead in certain cars? Clothes, certain designers, certain brand names? Vacation snob, you'd only go certain places and experience certain things, right? There are different ways in which we're snobs, and we're probably okay with owning that. In fact, this morning, I want to make a little bit of a confession to you of one of my areas of snobbery. And I want to confess to you that I am an apple snob. See, when I was a child, I ate Red Delicious because that's all I knew. But please, I don't even want to see one of those. I mean, that stuff is like bad applesauce, right? I mean, it's horrible. And don't even bring up Macintosh or anything like that either. Let me show you now the object of my snobbery, because I have been introduced to something called the sugar bee apple. And it is a cross between the Honeycrisp and something that is unidentified. But it is a slice of heaven right there. Expensive? You betcha. Hard to find? Yes. Worth every minute and every penny of it. I will never go back. I'm an apple snob, right? And so there are ways in which we will own that and we're okay with that, but there are certain things, and what James is going to address today is one of those areas of snobbery that we are not going to willingly admit. In fact, I think we'd probably all say, yeah, not me, not here, not now, not this person. But let's not think and act so quickly. And let's journey with James as he unpacks this issue. Because from his perspective, it's important. And it's something that has no place in a place like this, a new kind of community that God is seeking to establish in a broken world. So here we go. Here's his headline. My dear brothers and sisters, how can you claim to have faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ if you favor some people over others? And he was looking at what was happening in an environment like this and recognized some of that was happening. And what is he talking about here? The word favor actually comes from two Greek words that are put together, and the New Testament was written primarily in the Greek language. And it's interesting and helps us to understand it, that favor is the idea of face and take hold of. So it's taking hold of somebody's appearance and placing some value along with that and making some judgments based simply by what is on the exterior. And James is going to go after it. And again, I think the temptation is to say, yeah, I understand that. What does that have to do with me? I would never do something like that. Well, we'll see about that. And I invite you to take this journey along with James, because here's his headline. And now he's going to get beneath the surface of this. James chapter 2, verse 2. For example, suppose someone comes into your meeting dressed in fancy clothes and expensive jewelry, and another comes in who is poor and dressed in dirty clothes. If you give special attention and a good seat to the rich person, but you say to the poor one, you can stand over there, or else you can sit on the floor, well, doesn't this, interesting word, discrimination, show that your judgments are guided by evil motives? Ouch. That's pretty strong, isn't it? That's strong language. And he uses the word discrimination. I think we're more familiar with the word prejudice in our day. In the English language, that's two words that are put together, and it is to prejudge someone, to make judgments about them based on what we see or by some external cues. And it's the same thing, taking hold of somebody's face, seeing some appearance, seeing something external, and attaching a lot of value to it, whether it is for good or bad, and ranking somebody based on what we see, or making some assumptions about them. Again, maybe it's for the positive, that we put somebody in a certain category based on what we see. Or maybe we put them in a negative category based on what we see. And James is going after all of it. And that really is his concern. We judge on appearance who has worth and who does not. And when we do that, James says, it is a departure from what God would have for us and what it means to be a part of a community like this. And you know why he's so, on fire and getting after this issue? And really, he already told us. He calls it evil motives. Boy, evil's a strong word. And we say, yeah, well, when that shows up, we know it's probably not right, but does it go all the way to evil? James, why would you call it evil? Because that sounds pretty dark, and it is. Let me give you a few reasons why he says that. It's evil because it ranks people in ways that God does not. See, God sees everyone as someone of infinite value. Why? Because every person is created in the image of God. Right? It's not that some are and some aren't. We certainly don't work our way in that direction. It's just part of one of the gifts that God gives us. And to see somebody as less than that because of something on the exterior is a departure from that. Everyone is created in the image of God. And any time that we would rank somebody either higher or lower, it's taking us away from saying, no, everybody has this same value that is God-given, not achieved, but is something that is given. There is a story I heard about a University of Pennsylvania professor. He was teaching a sociology class, and he was a follower of Jesus, and in that environment, which often does not invite faith discussions, he would try to find ways to interject some faith into the discussion there. And so one day he asked this question to his sociology class. What do you think some of the great religious leaders through time would have said to a prostitute? And he was leading this in a certain direction. Now, when it comes to Buddha, he said, nobody knows. We don't have any record of that. When it comes to Muhammad, nobody knows because we have no record of that. And he said, well, what about Jesus? One of the students raises his hand and says, well, Jesus never met a prostitute. Professor is like, yes, he did. It's right there, in the pit. No, he never met a prostitute. The professor says, well, what do you mean? Well, I know what it says, that he, spoke with somebody who was engaged in that. But when he saw her, he didn't see her as that. And in that moment, the professor realized the student's right. He just didn't see people the same way. By the things and the labels that we often attach on the outside, he saw a person of infinite worth and value. And anytime that we rank people based on appearance, we take hold of their face, we attach some value based on that. It's a departure from the way that Jesus lived and what he did. Why is it evil? It also sets us up as a judge in the place of God. Who will have the final say about all things, including all people? It's not you or me, but there is a righteous and holy God who will. And one day he will determine everything exactly the way that it should be. But anytime we put ourselves into that place where we determine somebody's value or worth, we are putting ourselves into a role that only God can rightfully play. And so unless you want to sign up for God's job description, which is way beyond any of our capabilities, go ahead. But James says, you know what? We're putting ourselves in a place that we just cannot get it right. Why is it evil? It also robs people of God-given value and takes from them what God has given to them. It's never a good thing, never a wise thing for us to take something that God gives and to do away with it. But that's exactly what happens. And James was looking even in an environment like this and saying, you know what? Not here. Not now. Not in light of all that we have received from God, who doesn't do that. So why would we ever go in that direction? And when we do, what is it? James says, it's evil. Evil motives. And it's something that I think we also recognize. Why is it evil? We know it is from examples big and small. What do you mean by that? I think we all know that in this world there was a time when there were colonizing nations that were taking people, treating them as property, and buying and selling them as slaves. It's one of the dark marks in the history of this world. A couple years ago, I was part of a group that went to the country of Mozambique, and that is one of the many places where that was a reality. We were taken to a fort where people were brought, and they were held for a time until the slave ships came, and they were placed on those ships and sent to all different parts of the world to simply work as a piece of property. And I think we all, inside of ourselves, we look at that and we go, yeah, that is horrible, and may it never happen again. But what is so easy to see on a big scale like that is also so easy to dismiss when it's a little bit more on a personal level. One example of that, where it's a little bit smaller, we're originally from the East Coast and we were serving at a church. It's a lot like this one. And we were living in a neighborhood close to the church there, and our neighbors, we were together with them one day. And so we said one day, hey, why don't you come to church with us? They said, oh, well, where is that church? And we told them the name, and they go, oh, yeah, we've been there. And it was like a dark cloud came in the room. And I was like, oh, really? Great. And they were like, yeah, let me tell you what happened. We were there, and our friends came along with us. Their friends were in an interracial marriage. She was white, he was black. So when they were in the church, there was this custom where on the way out, you would file, out past the front door, and the pastor would be there to shake everybody's hands and say hi to them and all of that, which we can't do here because that would take way too long. But as they were coming out and the pastor's doing that, the wife comes up first and he shakes her hand. Next comes the husband and he puts out his hand, and the pastor does one of these. And that moment for them was as real as the day that it happened. And that was their perspective of what this is. Made an impact, don't you think? They wanted to have nothing of it. And as much as I wanted to say, yeah, well, it's not the way now, doesn't matter at that point. And that's why James says, you know what? Big or small, any form or fashion, it's evil. And let's own it for what it is. And I think our tendency is that we can wink at these things and say, oh yeah, but in the scheme of things, is that the worst thing? James says, it's evil. He's not done yet. He's going to keep building his case. So listen to me, this is verse 5. Dear brothers and sisters, hasn't God chosen the poor in this world to be rich in faith? Aren't they the ones who will inherit the kingdom he promised to those who love him? But you dishonor the poor. Isn't it the rich who oppress you and drag you into court? Aren't they the ones who slander Jesus Christ, whose noble name you bear? And so James says first, you know what? Don't do it because it's evil. And now he's going to tell us don't do it because favoritism isn't smart. Unless, of course, you want to set yourself up against God. Then it's a really good way to go. Well, what is he talking about? Right? He says God has chosen the poor. Now, what does that mean? And we need to think carefully about this. Isn't James saying the same thing that he's arguing against? He's saying don't put people in rank or order of value. But then it says that God has chosen the poor. It makes it sound like, the poor in a higher position in God's eyes. That's not what he's talking about. He's talking about those moments when the poor, who are often disadvantaged, oppressed, abused in all kinds of ways, are mistreated. And you can know for a fact that God's heart is with those who are oppressed and mistreated and abused, whatever the scenario is. So if you want to set yourself up against God, then great. Join in that whole thing that takes advantage of certain people, because God's after that. And when you do, you know what? You're working against God. Never a good place to be. You will lose that battle. And then James also makes it clear favoritism just reproduces standard operating procedure of this junked up world. He says, isn't it the rich who are doing that very thing to you? Right? They're bringing you into court. They're mistreating you. They're leveraging their power and their authority and their wealth, and they're working against you. Why in the world would you want to reproduce what you experience in this new kind of community. We see it all the time. Let's not bring it here. Let's not do the same thing that we know isn't good and isn't helpful. Because after all, God's community, his new kind of community, was meant to be positively different. And you know what? In its first days, it was. See, James isn't just writing here, in theory. He's talking about the reality of what happened in those days. And there were people of position and wealth who were working against what was happening in the church in its early years. Because things were different, and it affected certain people. It even brought about an economic reality for some people. Here's one example from the book of Acts, chapter 16. In a city called Ephesus, they were into all kinds of pagan gods, and they would often make these idols and sell them to people in town. Well, so many people there were becoming followers of Jesus that the people who were in the pagan god sales business were experiencing a recession because people weren't buying those pagan gods anymore. And so there was virtually a riot because of the change that was brought about. You saw other things as well. In the normal world back then, a slave could never lead anyone. But in the church, it was different. And you would find a slave who had become a leader, who would even sometimes be leading a Roman centurion. Unheard of. In that environment, the role and the worth of women was elevated in a way that this world had never seen. And a newfound value was given. Where did they get those kind of ideas? From Jesus. And they were just trying to make it real. The beginning of the end of the slave trade of its day was born by people who are trying to live out this reality that every single person has God-given value. And so you don't take some and treat them as property. They matter to God. What does that mean in real life? Slavery's got to go. And you can imagine that upset the normal operating world that many people experienced, and there was some reaction to it. And James is saying, isn't that what happens to you? There's backlash as a result of that. Why would you ever create the same dynamic in God's new kind of community that is supposed to be positively different? Just not smart. Yes, indeed, it is good when you obey the royal law as found in the scriptures. Love your neighbor as yourself. And if you favor some people over others, you are committing a sin. You are guilty of breaking the law. For the person who keeps all the laws except one is as guilty as a person who has broken all of God's laws. For the same God who said, you must not commit adultery, also said, you must not murder. So if you murder someone but do not commit adultery, you have still broken the whole law. So what is James going after here? And you know who he's drawing from in some of the things that he quotes? Jesus. One day, Jesus is asked this question, hey, what is it all about? Jesus, if you just netted this thing out, what is the bottom line? What is God after? What's the bullseye? And Jesus said, I'll tell you. The greatest commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And then he said, and the second one is just like it. It doesn't sound like it, but Jesus said it's just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself, and that's what he includes as a royal law. And so when we favor certain people based on external criteria, what we are doing is breaking the royal law. James calls it sin. Evil, sin. Boy, it sounds like you're taking this pretty seriously, James. Yep. And then what is this about adultery and murder? Because I thought we were talking about favoritism. There he's also borrowing from Jesus and things that he mentioned in what we often call the Sermon on the Mount. And on that day, Jesus was after self-righteous religious people who were basically making and living in this space where they said, hey, when it comes to God, we're good to go because we've never murdered anybody and we've never committed adultery. Well, that's great. But what Jesus wanted to expose on that day is that if you have anger, hatred in your heart, that anger and that hatred is of the same spirit that leads some people to commit that horrible act of murder. And just because you haven't done that does not let you off the hook from what you do have, and you need to own it for what it is and recognize that it is dark and it needs to go. And that lust that you hold in your heart, even though you maybe haven't committed adultery, it is of the same spirit that leads some people to break their marital vows. And so let's not just wink at it and dismiss it quickly, because it's evil, it's sin, and it needs to go. See, favoritism goes beyond just snobbery to breaking the great commandment. If you want to look, what is it really all about, Jesus? Where's the bullseye? Anytime we favor someone, we're breaking what Jesus said. Here you go. If you know nothing else, know this. And we're working against that. And every time it plays out in this world, prejudice isn't a skin problem, it's a sin problem. It takes us deeper than just the surface level and takes us to something that is very dark, that we would do well to acknowledge, to admit, to own, and to invite God to eradicate from these hearts of ours. You know, I read not too long ago, somebody said that the most segregated hour in America is 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning at a time like this. And I fear that that's true. And I wonder if, and really I kind of think that it grieves the heart of God that that's the reality. That we have found ways to separate from each other. Could it be because we look at people in certain ways and we just don't want to be associated? So let me give you some ways in which I think we can make this real, some application for our lives. My guess is, because it's Father's Day, many people are going to go out to eat after this, and if not today, I'm sure that that'll be a part of maybe even your week to come. Let me ask you this: how do you treat a waiter who's serving you at that moment? Are they somebody who is there, to be spoken to in any kind of way, and especially if something gets messed up? Talk about first world problems, right? But sometimes we can devalue somebody who probably is working for minimum wage or even less. I didn't do that for very long. It's hard work and often very unappreciated. So how will you talk to them? How will you see them? And I've invited people to do this before, and I invite you to do this, whether it's today or sometime this coming week. Why don't you bless them greatly when tip time comes? Bless them so greatly that they might even follow you out to your car to thank you for the tip that you gave them on that day. Why not? Don't have to do it every time. But I wonder if we do it once in a while, we recognize, you know what, that's a person of value. That's a person who matters to God just as much as I do. How will I treat them? How will I engage them? And I think in those moments, if we do that, James would say, yeah, that's how we learn that lesson, is to make it real. How about in your neighborhood? Now again, my guess is we probably wouldn't say this out loud, but has there ever been a time where somebody moved in and they were different in some kind of way, and probably we thought inside, well, there goes the neighborhood. And I think James would say, yeah, that's what I'm talking about right there. Own that for what it is. It's evil. It's not smart. Get it out of your life. How about an interracial marriage? There's nothing biblically about that being outside of what God has for us. But I wonder if we see that, we back away from that, or we think certain things about that. And let's not just quickly run by that. Let's own that for what it is. How about the moments in which we're good with somebody in our situation but not another? And for example, maybe there might be somebody, who's gone through an addiction, and just struggle with that, and all kinds of things played out in their life. And then maybe that's our situation. We say, yeah, I get that, I understand that. But then over here is somebody who's been involved in something very different. We go, oh, I'd never do that. And we can be so gracious and so forgiving to the people that we identify with. We can be so quick to dismiss people who are in a different place and have struggled or maybe sinned in a different way than we have. And James is calling us away from that. Because what have we received after all? That's how he's going to wrap all of this up. He's going to show us that. So whatever you say or whatever you do, remember that you will be judged by the law that sets you free. There will be no mercy for those who have not shown mercy to others. But if you have been merciful, God will be merciful when he judges you. That's pretty strong again, isn't it? And James is saying, what have you received from God? Mercy, grace. And aren't those words interchangeable? Not exactly. They often go together, and rightly so. But what is mercy? It is not receiving what we do deserve, withholding what is rightfully ours. And so much of that has been done by Jesus, all of it. Grace is us receiving what we do not deserve, and all of it at Christ's expense. And so we don't get what we should get. We do get what we had no right to get. And James is saying on the other side of that, if you want to treat people with no mercy, isn't that what you've received? And if it is, shouldn't it be what you give? And may that more and more become the way in which we live our lives. And so maybe to wrap all of it up and sum up what he's talking about here, especially at the end, mercy eats prejudice for breakfast. And may that express the hearts and lives of people who recognize, the only reason that I could ever be made right with a holy God is because of his mercy. So just logically, just common sense-wise, what should I give? What I've received. What I've received from God. But how easy it is for us to buy into some of the ways in which this world works and overlook it, wink it away. James says, not here. May this increasingly become a different kind of community in all of the right ways. Because after all, isn't that what we've been given? I'm going to invite you to bow your heads together with me. Lord Jesus, thank you for this time together. Thank you for who you are and for the difference that you make. We thank you for your mercy, your grace that is made so readily available to it. Every bit of it undeserved and yet so freely given. And God, as people on the other side of that, help us to live out what we have been given. Help us in the moments when we don't to call it what it is and to invite you to transform us and to change us. And in those moments may we say, not here. That's not the God that we've come to honor and worship today. And so God, work in these hearts and lives of ours and help us to be people of mercy more and more. And we ask and pray your help in that direction. In Jesus' name, amen.